welcome, dear listener, to a place where mysteries come alive. Here, we bring you timeless tales of clever detectives, hidden motives, and unexpected twists. Whether it's the daring charm of Tommy and Tuppence, or the keen intellect of Poirot, every story invites you to think, to feel, and to solve the case. Stay curious, and welcome to Guardian of the Night Stories. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Hercule Poirot's London flat, casting geometric patterns across the precisely arranged furniture. Poirot himself sat at his breakfast table, a cup of chocolate positioned exactly in the centre of its saucer, contemplating with satisfaction the perfect symmetry of his toast soldiers. "Ah, Hastings," he said, without looking up as his friend entered. "You are punctual this morning. It is most agreeable." Captain Arthur Hastings helped himself to coffee from the sideboard and settled into his customary chair. "Lovely morning, Poirot. Spring in London can't beat it, indeed. The season when the English emerge from their winter hibernation, like the... what is it? The hedgehog, perhaps? And immediately they begin to receive invitations to the country." Hastings laughed. "Funny you should mention that. I've just had a letter from my cousin's wife, Lady Hermione Ashford. Remember her? But of course, the lady with the unfortunate tendency to wear hats that resemble deceased fowl. That's the one. Well, she's invited us both down to Willowmere. That's their place in Surrey, for a long weekend. Quite a house party, apparently. She's particularly keen for you to come, Poirot. Says she has a little mystery that might amuse you." Poirot's eyes, which had been regarding his breakfast with benevolent approval, suddenly sharpened. "A mystery? Of what nature?" "Oh, nothing sinister, I shouldn't think. You know how these society women are. Probably lost a bracelet or suspects the butler of stealing the silver. But it might be rather pleasant. Good food, fresh air, and Willowmere really is a magnificent house. Georgian, you know, with quite a famous garden." "Ah, the gardens. They will be symmetrical?" "As a matter of fact, yes. Formal terraces and all that." Poirot dabbed his lips with his napkin, a gesture of decision. "Then we shall accept, mon ami. The symmetry, it appeals to me, and perhaps this little mystery will provide some interest. The mind, Hastings, it requires occupation, or else it becomes, how do you say, the rusty." "Rusty, old chap. Just rusty, précisément." 3 days later, the two friends found themselves in a first-class railway carriage, speeding through the verdant Surrey countryside. Hastings read his Times, while Poirot observed the passing landscape with the air of one who found the irregular arrangement of trees and hedgerows faintly distressing. "This Lady Hermione," Poirot said suddenly. "She is married to Sir Reginald Ashford, yes. The diplomat? That's right. He was in the Foreign Office for years. India, I believe, then somewhere in South America. Retired now, of course. Must be pushing 70, and they are wealthy? Oh, rather. Old money on his side, and Hermione brought quite a fortune of her own. No children, though. The estate will go to Sir Reginald's nephew, I believe, chap called Maurice." Poirot's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Ah, and this nephew, he lives at Willowmere. Not permanently, but he visits often. Pleasant enough fellow, though a bit of a playboy. Races cars and all that. Lives beyond his means, from what I gather. But then he knows he'll inherit eventually." "Most interesting. And who else will be present at this house party?" Hastings consulted a letter from his pocket. "Let's see. There's Miss Claudia Vane. She's some sort of writer, I think. Rather modern. Then there's Dr. Gerald Thornley, an old friend of Sir Reginald's from his India days. A Mr. James Whitmore and his wife Sylvia. They're neighbours from the next estate. And finally, a foreign gentleman, a Count Vassiliev. Russian émigré, apparently. Hermione says he's quite charming, but rather mysterious. A Russian count. Poirot's tone was delicately sceptical. In England, every Russian becomes a count, and every count becomes mysterious. It is the fashion. You're terribly cynical, Poirot. Not cynical, my friend. Merely observant. And I observe that in a house party containing an heir who lives beyond his means, a mysterious foreign count, and a lady who summons a detective for what she calls a little mystery, there exists the possibility of something more than a lost bracelet. Good Lord, Poirot, you're not suggesting I suggest nothing. I merely prepare the little grey cells for whatever may transpire. It is always well to be prepared, n'est-ce pas? The car that met them at the station was a handsome Daimler, driven by a chauffeur of impressive dignity. They motored through narrow lanes bordered by ancient hedgerows bursting with hawthorn, and presently turned through a pair of wrought-iron gates into a long drive lined with lime trees. Willowmere rose before them with elegant Georgian proportions. 3 stories of honey-coloured stone, with a central portico supported by Ionic columns. The windows gleamed in the afternoon sun, and the formal gardens stretched away on either side in gratifying symmetry. Magnificent, isn't it? Hastings said with satisfaction. It has, Poirot conceded. A certain correctness. They were greeted in the entrance hall by Lady Hermione herself, a tall, angular woman in her early 60s, dressed in flowing tea-gown of violet silk. Her hat, it must be said, did indeed bear a suspicious resemblance to a pheasant. Arthur, how delightful! And Monsieur Poirot, I'm absolutely thrilled you could come. She clasped Poirot's hand warmly. Now, you must be exhausted from your journey. Benson will show you to your rooms, and then we'll have tea on the terrace. Such a glorious day. As they followed the butler up the sweeping staircase, Hastings whispered, She seems in good spirits. Perhaps her mystery isn't weighing on her too heavily. Perhaps, Poirot murmured. Or perhaps she is very good at the concealment. They were given adjoining rooms in the west wing, both furnished with that comfortable luxury characteristic of the English country house. Poirot's room looked out over the formal gardens, and he stood at the window for a moment, nodding approval at the geometric precision of the parterre. When they descended for tea, they found the other guests already assembled on the stone terrace overlooking the rose garden. Sir Reginald Ashford proved to be a spare, upright man, with white hair and the weathered complexion of one who had spent many years in tropical climates. He greeted them with old-fashioned courtesy. Delighted you could join us, gentlemen. Any friend of my wife's cousin is most welcome. You know everyone, I think? No. Then allow me. Maurice Ashford, the nephew and heir, was a sleek young man of about 30, with dark hair slicked back and the slightly dissipated air of one who had dined too well and slept too little. He shook hands with an easy charm, his eyes appraising Poirot with undisguised curiosity. The famous detective, eh? Hermione's been quite mysterious about why she invited you. Are we all under suspicion? He laughed at his own joke. Miss Claudia Vane, the writer, was a striking woman of perhaps 40, with prematurely grey hair worn in a dramatic bob. She smoked incessantly from a long cigarette holder and regarded Poirot with intelligent interest. Monsieur Poirot, I've read about your cases, of course. I write detective fiction myself, though I'm sure you'd find it terribly amateurish. On the contrary, mademoiselle, the writer of fiction often perceives truths that escape the ordinary observer. You study the human nature, yes? Constantly, she said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. One must in my profession. Dr. Gerald Thornley was a stout, red-faced man with thinning hair, and the bluff manner of a military physician. He pumped Poirot's hand vigorously. "Good to meet you, sir. Known Reggie since our India days. Patched up more than a few of his diplomatic crises, I can tell you." He laughed heartily at this, though Sir Reginald looked faintly pained. Mr. James Whitmore and his wife Sylvia proved to be a study in contrasts. He was thin and nervous, constantly adjusting his spectacles, while she was plump and placid, with a sweet smile and vague manner. They owned the neighbouring estate and had known the Ashfords for many years. "Such a treat to have company," Mrs. Whitmore murmured. "We're quite isolated here, really. James is always buried in his butterflies." "Lepidoptera," her husband corrected stiffly. "I'm preparing a monograph on the species of Surrey." "How fascinating," Hastings said politely. The last guest to appear was Count Vasiliev, who emerged onto the terrace with the air of one making a studied entrance. He was a tall, distinguished man of indeterminate age, with grey temples and dark, melancholy eyes. His English was excellent, though heavily accented. "Monsieur Poirot! But this is extraordinary! The famous detective himself!" He bowed with old-world courtesy. "We met once before, I think, in St. Petersburg, before the Revolution, at the house of Prince Orloff." Poirot's face remained courteously blank. "I regret, monsieur, that I do not recall the occasion. No, perhaps I am mistaken. It was so long ago, and so many things have changed." A shadow passed across the Count's face. "Oh, so very many things." Lady Hermione presided over the tea-table with practised grace, distributing cups and ensuring that conversation flowed smoothly. But Poirot, accepting his chocolate with precise thanks, noticed certain undercurrents beneath the polished surface. Maurice Ashford, for instance, could not keep his eyes from Miss Vane, who seemed deliberately to ignore him. Mrs. Whitmore watched her husband with a peculiar anxiety whenever he spoke. Dr. Thornley drank his tea in quick, nervous gulps, and kept glancing at Sir Reginald as though awaiting some signal, and the Count, despite his easy charm, had the alert watchfulness of a man who trusts no one. Only Sir Reginald himself seemed entirely at ease, discussing the garden with Hastings and inquiring politely about Poirot's latest cases. "I understand you recently concluded a matter on the continent," Sir Reginald said. "Something to do with a theft at a chateau." "A small affair," Poirot demurred. "The little grey cells, they were barely required." "You're too modest, Monsieur Poirot," Lady Hermione said brightly, perhaps a shade too brightly. "Which brings me to my reason for inviting you. I wonder if after tea you might spare me a few moments. There's something I'd very much like to discuss with you, privately." "But of course, madam. I'm entirely at your service," Maurice Ashford laughed. "There you are, everyone. I told you Aunt Hermione had an ulterior motive. What have you lost, Aunt? The emeralds? Or has one of the servants been pilfering?" "Don't be absurd, Maurice," Lady Hermione said with a touch of asperity. "It's nothing of the sort. Simply a small matter that's been puzzling me." But Poirot noticed that her hand trembled slightly as she set down her cup. After tea, Lady Hermione drew Poirot aside to the library, a handsome room lined with books that bore the patina of age and respectability. She settled into a chair by the window and gestured for Poirot to take the seat opposite. "I'm sure you think me very foolish, Monsieur Poirot," she began, twisting her handkerchief in her lap. "Perhaps I am, but certain things have been happening here at Willowmere that I simply cannot explain, and they've been weighing on my mind dreadfully." "Pray tell me everything, madam. Nothing is too small, too insignificant. Well, it began about 6 weeks ago. Small things at first. Objects out of place. A photograph moved on the mantelpiece. A drawer left open that I was certain I'd closed. Then my personal letters were disturbed. I keep them in my writing desk, you see, tied with ribbon, and I found them disarranged. You are certain of this? Quite certain. I'm rather particular about such things. And you mentioned this to your husband? A flush crept up Lady Hermione's neck. No, that is, Reginald would think me fanciful. He doesn't approve of fuss. Continue, if you please. Then, about 3 weeks ago, something more serious occurred. A small miniature portrait disappeared from my dressing table. It was quite valuable, 18th century, painted on ivory. It showed my great-grandmother as a young woman. I searched everywhere, but it was simply gone. You informed your husband of this theft. I wasn't certain it was stolen. You see, Reginald has been talking lately about selling some of our smaller pieces. Nothing major, but the estate requires rather a lot of upkeep, and he's been concerned about expenses. I thought perhaps he'd taken it to have it valued, and hadn't mentioned it to spare my feelings. But you did not ask him? No, she looked away. We've been married 40 years, Monsieur Poirot, and I've learned when to ask questions and when to simply wait. Poirot's eyes were very shrewd. And there is more? Yes, last week I found this. She drew from her pocket a folded piece of paper, which she handed to Poirot. He opened it carefully. The paper was of good quality, cream-coloured and watermarked. Upon it, in neat block capitals, someone had written, "The truth will come out. Secrets cannot remain hidden forever." Where did you find this, madam? On my pillow. On top of my pillow, lying there when I came to dress for dinner. It gave me such a shock I nearly called out. But then I thought about it and decided not to say anything. Not yet. And you have received no other such messages? No. But, Monsieur Poirot, I've been so unsettled. I hardly know what to think. Is someone in this house trying to frighten me? And if so, why? I've done nothing wrong. Nothing at all. Poirot was silent for a moment, his fingertips pressed together in his characteristic gesture. Lady Hermione, I must ask you a question, and I beg that you will answer with complete honesty. Do you know of any secret whatsoever, connected with this house or its inhabitants? She met his eyes, and he saw real fear there. There are always secrets in old families, Monsieur Poirot. Things that happened long ago, that are best left buried. Perhaps. But secrets, madame, they have a way of refusing to remain buried. Like the weed in the garden, they push up through the earth. And sometimes they are poisonous. You think this is serious, then? I think, Poirot said carefully, that someone wishes to disturb your peace of mind. Whether their purpose is mischief or malice, I cannot yet say. But I will observe, madam. I will watch and listen, and when the moment is right, perhaps the truth will reveal itself. Lady Hermione rose, looking somewhat relieved. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I feel better for having shared this with someone. You'll be discreet, but naturally, I'm the soul of discretion. When Poirot returned to his room, he found Hastings unpacking his evening clothes. Well, Poirot, what's the big mystery? Poirot related Lady Hermione's concerns, watching his friend's reaction carefully. Hastings frowned. Sounds like someone playing silly games to upset her. Probably one of the servants with a grudge, perhaps. But consider, Hastings, Lady Hermione is not a fanciful woman, and this note, it is not the work of a servant. The paper is expensive. The handwriting is educated, disguised though it may be. You think one of the guests? I think, Poirot said precisely, that in this house there are currents beneath the surface. At tea I observed much. Maurice Ashford is in love with Miss Vane, who does not return his affection, or chooses not to display it. Mrs. Whitmore watches her husband with the anxiety of one who fears discovery. Dr. Thornley is nervous about something, and the mysterious Count, he claims to have met me in St. Petersburg, which is completely false. I have never been to St. Petersburg. But why would he lie about such a thing? That, mon ami, is one of the questions we must answer. But now we must dress for dinner, and tonight I think we will observe most carefully. For somewhere in this house party there is one who knows more than they reveal. The dining room at Willowmere was a masterpiece of understated elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the long mahogany table, and ancestral portraits looked down from the walls with painted disapproval. The guests assembled promptly at 8, the gentlemen in evening dress, the ladies in fashionable gowns. Miss Vane wore black silk that emphasized her striking grey hair, while Lady Hermione was resplendent in burgundy. Velvet, Mrs. Whitmore had chosen a rather unfortunate shade of puce that did nothing for her complexion. The conversation over dinner was lively but careful, the kind of talk that reveals breeding while concealing feeling. Count Vasiliev entertained them with stories of pre-revolutionary St. Petersburg, carefully edited for mixed company. Maurice Ashford described his recent motor race at Brooklands with more enthusiasm than grammatical precision. Miss Vane spoke wittily about the publishing world, and Dr. Thornley held forth on his recent travels to Switzerland. But Poirot, eating his turbot with appreciation, noted the small revelations that others missed. When Sir Reginald mentioned his nephew's inheritance, Maurice's hand tightened on his wine-glass until the knuckles showed white. When Count Vasiliev described a particular ball at the Winter Palace, Miss Vane's eyes flickered to him with an expression Poirot could not quite interpret. When Lady Hermione mentioned selling some family pieces, her husband's face grew stern, and he changed the subject rather abruptly. "You're very quiet, Monsieur Poirot," Miss Vane said suddenly. "Are you studying us all for criminal tendencies?" "But no, mademoiselle. I am merely enjoying this excellent turbot. The English, when they trouble to do so, they cook the fish superbly." "A compliment indeed," Sir Reginald said with a smile. "Our cook will be flattered. She's French, you know, from Provence." "Ah, then that explains it." The gentlemen did not linger long over their port, and soon they rejoined the ladies in the drawing-room. Lady Hermione had arranged for cards, and the party divided into 2 tables. Poirot, pleading fatigue, settled himself in a chair near the fireplace, with a small cup of sirop de cassis, ostensibly reading the Times but actually observing the players. Maurice Ashford managed to seat himself beside Miss Vane at her table, despite her obvious preference for Count Vasiliev as a partner. The Count played with the casual brilliance of one to whom cards are second nature, while Miss Vane's attention seemed divided between her hand and something else entirely. At the other table, the Whitmores partnered each other with the ease of long habit, while Dr. Thornley played with abstracted competence against Sir Reginald and Lady Hermione. But Poirot noticed that whenever Sir Reginald addressed his wife, a slight tension entered her shoulders, and her replies were carefully neutral. Shortly before 11, as the second rubber was concluding, an odd little incident occurred. Benson, the butler, entered bearing a silver salver, which he presented to Count Vasiliev. "A telegram has arrived for you, sir. The boy brought it from the village." The Count's face changed subtly as he read the message. The colour drained from his cheeks, and his hand trembled. "Bad news, I hope not?" Sir Reginald inquired. No, simply unexpected. A matter of business. I may need to return to London tomorrow. I do apologize for disrupting the party." "My dear fellow, of course you must do what's necessary, though we'll be sorry to lose you." The Count folded the telegram carefully and placed it in his breast pocket. But Poirot, watching closely, saw his eyes move to Lady Hermione, and saw Lady Hermione look quickly away. The party broke up shortly afterward. As the guests dispersed to their rooms, Poirot touched Hastings's arm. "A moment, mon ami. Let us take a turn in the garden. The night is mild, and I wish to think." They stepped out through the French windows onto the terrace. The moon was nearly full, casting silver shadows across the geometric garden beds. Somewhere in the distance an owl called. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Hastings said. "Rather romantic perhaps, but also revealing. Come, Hastings, use the little grey cells. What did you observe tonight?" "Well, everyone seemed pleasant enough. Good dinner. Cards afterward. That telegram upset the Count, obviously. Good. And what else?" Hastings frowned, thinking. Lady Hermione seemed nervous. Maurice is clearly sweet on Miss Vane. Dr. Thornley had rather a lot to drink. Excellent. You observe, though you do not always interpret. But tonight, Hastings, I observed something most interesting. When the telegram arrived for Count Vassiliev, I watched the reactions most carefully. Sir Reginald showed polite concern. Maurice Ashford was indifferent. The Whitmores did not notice, absorbed in their cards. Dr. Thornley looked startled, then quickly composed his face. Miss Vane raised her eyebrows. But Lady Hermione went quite pale and gripped the edge of the table. She knows the Count, then? She knows something about him, certainly. And he knows something about her, or about this house. It is all most intriguing. They had walked to the far end of the terrace, where steps led down to a lower garden. In the moonlight, Poirot noticed something that made him pause. "What is it?" Hastings asked. "These stones here. They are disturbed recently, you see. The earth between them is fresh, and one is loose." He bent down, and with surprising agility for one of his years, examined the ground. Someone has been digging here. Surely just the gardener. At night, in this particular spot. Poirot straightened, brushing invisible dust from his trousers. "No, Hastings. Someone has been searching for something, and perhaps," he added softly, "they have found it." They returned to the house in thoughtful silence. As they reached the door, they encountered Miss Vane, who was standing in the shadows of the portico, smoking a cigarette. "Unable to sleep, gentlemen? The night is too beautiful," Poirot said gallantly. "And you, mademoiselle? Inspiration strikes at odd hours. I often walk at night. It helps me plot my murders." She smiled, but her eyes were serious. "Be careful, Monsieur Poirot. Old houses hold many secrets. Not all of them should be uncovered." And with that cryptic warning, she crushed out her cigarette and vanished into the house. Poirot woke early the next morning, as was his custom. The house was still silent as he performed his precise ablutions and dressed with meticulous care. The morning promised to be fine, with that peculiar clarity of English spring light that made everything seem freshly painted. He found his way to the breakfast room, where only Sir Reginald was present, reading the morning papers while consuming devilled kidneys. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot, you're an early riser. Help yourself. Everything's on the sideboard." "You are most kind." Poirot selected a boiled egg, which he regarded with approval before seating himself. "You also rise early, Sir Reginald. Old habit from my India days. In the hot season, one learned to work in the cool of the morning. The habit persists. You were many years in India." "Nearly 20. I loved it, actually. The people, the culture, fascinating. Of course, Hermione never really took to it. The heat didn't suit her, and she worried constantly about disease. She was much happier when we were posted to Argentina." "And Dr. Thornley, he was with you in India?" "Gerald, yes, for several years. Army Medical Corps. Decent fellow, though he drinks more than is good for him. Still, he saw some rough business out there. It changes a man." Poirot applied himself to his egg with mathematical precision. And your nephew Maurice? He does not work. Sir Reginald's expression cooled slightly. Maurice has a small income from his mother's family. Not enough to support his lifestyle, unfortunately. He's been pressing me rather heavily for loans recently. Between you and me, Poirot, I'm becoming concerned. The boy has expectations, of course, but one cannot live on expectations. Indeed not. It must be difficult for both of you. It is what it is. Sir Reginald folded his newspaper with an air of finality. I've told Maurice he needs to find some sort of occupation. Can't just motor about indefinitely. But young men these days. He shook his head. The others began to drift in. Dr. Thornley, looking somewhat the worse for wear, helped himself to a substantial plate of eggs and bacon. Mrs. Whitmore arrived with her husband, who immediately buried himself in a book about butterflies. Maurice appeared late, elegant in a silk dressing gown, and poured himself black coffee without attempting food. "Where's Aunt Hermione?" he asked. "Not like her to miss breakfast." "I believe Lady Hermione is breakfasting in her room," Benson announced from the doorway. "She sent word that she has a slight headache." "Poor darling," Maurice said without much conviction. "All the strain of entertaining. Where's the glamorous Miss Vane?" "Miss Vane has already breakfasted and is walking in the gardens," Benson replied with perfect aplomb. "Of course she is. Probably communing with nature for her next lurid thriller." Maurice caught Poirot's eye. "You've read her books, Monsieur Poirot? The Crimson Dagger, Death Wears Diamonds, that sort of thing." "Regrettably, I have not yet had that pleasure." "Oh, they're tremendous fun. All blood and passion and dreadful secrets. Rather unlike real life, where the most exciting thing that happens is Aunt Hermione losing her reading glasses." "You think so?" Miss Vane's voice came from the doorway, cool and amused. She had entered unheard, her walking shoes mud-stained from the gardens. "I think real life can be quite as dramatic as fiction, Mr. Ashford. Sometimes more so." Maurice flushed slightly. "I didn't mean— Of course you didn't." She helped herself to coffee and toast, ignoring him with the studied ease of long practice. "Lovely morning for a walk. The gardens are beautiful at this time of year. Though I did notice something rather odd." "Oh?" Sir Reginald looked up. Some of the paving stones on the lower terrace appeared to have been disturbed. "Quite recent, I'd say. I nearly turned my ankle on a loose one. The devil!" Sir Reginald frowned. "I'll speak to the gardener, most careless." But Poirot noticed that Sir Reginald's hand had tightened on his coffee cup, and that Dr. Thornley had suddenly become very still. Hastings appeared at that moment, cheerful and hungry, and the conversation moved to plans for the day. There was to be a walk to the village church, which dated from the Norman period, and luncheon would be served on the terrace if the weather held. "And this afternoon," Lady Hermione announced, appearing in the doorway in an elaborate morning gown, "I thought we might have a small treasure hunt, just for amusement. I've prepared several clues leading around the house and gardens. Quite fun." Her manner was determinedly bright, but Poirot observed dark circles beneath her eyes, inadequately concealed by powder. The morning proceeded pleasantly enough. Most of the party walked to the village, admiring the church and taking tea at the local inn. Maurice remained behind, claiming letters to write, and Dr. Thornley also excused himself, saying he felt unwell. Count Vasiliev had departed immediately after breakfast, explaining apologetically that urgent business required his return to London. He had kissed Lady Hermione's hand with old-world courtesy, and Poirot had seen her shiver slightly at his touch. "Rather sudden, his departure," Hastings remarked as they walked back to Willowmere through the country lanes. "Most sudden," Poirot agreed. "That telegram last night, it disturbed him greatly, and others also." "You think it's connected to Lady Hermione's mysterious troubles?" "I think, mon ami, that in this house many threads are tangled, and when one pulls on a single thread, the entire tapestry may unravel. They returned to find luncheon laid out on the terrace. Cold salmon, cucumber salad, strawberries and cream. It was a perfect English afternoon, drowsy with warmth and the hum of bees in the wisteria. After luncheon, Lady Hermione clapped her hands for attention. Now, for our treasure hunt, I've divided you into teams. Sir Reginald and Dr. Thornley, you'll be one team. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, another. Maurice and Miss Vane, oh, I think not, Miss Vane said quickly. I'll sit out if you don't mind. I have some letters to write. Maurice's face darkened, but he said nothing. Very well. Then Maurice, you'll hunt solo, and Captain Hastings and Monsieur Poirot can form a team. The final clue will lead to a prize. A rather nice bottle of champagne. Here are your first clues. She distributed sealed envelopes with the air of one determined to salvage gaiety from an awkward moment. The teams scattered, consulting their clues with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Hastings opened their envelope. Inside was a card with neat handwriting. Where time stands still but always moves, seek the answer that the wise man proves. The library, Hastings exclaimed. Father Time and wise men, books. Perhaps, Poirot murmured. Or perhaps a clock? But when they reached the library, they found it empty. Poirot examined the room methodically while Hastings searched among the bookshelves. Here, Poirot! Behind the gibbon, another envelope. The second clue read, In earth I rest, but am not growing, my reflection in the water showing. The garden, Hastings declared. Come on! But as they turned to leave, Poirot paused. On the writing desk, partially concealed beneath a book, he spotted a scrap of paper. He picked it up carefully. It was a fragment of a letter, torn as though in haste. Only a few words were visible. Cannot continue to protect. The truth must. Dangerous too. Poirot, are you coming? But yes, immediately. He pocketed the fragment and followed Hastings out to the garden. They found the Whitmores examining the ornamental pond, and Sir Reginald and Dr. Thornley debating near the rose garden. Maurice was nowhere to be seen. Any luck? Hastings called. Not yet, Mr. Whitmore replied, adjusting his spectacles. This reflection business is quite confusing. Poirot, however, was studying the pond more carefully. At its centre stood a stone cherub, water spouting from its mouth into the lily-covered water. The reflection was indeed clear in the still surface. Hastings, if you would be so kind. That cherub, can you reach behind it? With some difficulty, Hastings waded to the centre and felt behind the statue. Got it, another envelope. The third clue was more direct. Where the master's treasures lie, in velvet darkness, safe and dry. The safe, Hastings said triumphantly. Must be in Sir Reginald's study. They found Sir Reginald's study empty, the door unlocked. The room was quintessentially masculine. Leather chairs, hunting prints, a massive desk. Behind a portrait of a stern-looking ancestor, the safe was indeed visible, its door closed. Well, we can hardly open it, Hastings said doubtfully. Perhaps the next clue is simply near it, Poirot suggested. They searched the area around the safe carefully. Poirot was reaching up to check the picture frame when they heard a sharp cry from somewhere in the house, followed by a crash. They rushed into the hallway, meeting the Whitmores and Sir Reginald emerging from various directions. What was that? Sir Reginald demanded. A scream came from upstairs, Lady Hermione's voice. They ran up the stairs and found her in her sitting room, ashen-faced, staring at her dressing table. What is it, my dear? Sir Reginald took her arm. She pointed with a shaking hand. On the polished surface of the dressing table, arranged with deliberate care, lay 3 objects: a miniature portrait in an ivory frame, a string of pearls, and a small photograph of a young man in military uniform. "The miniature," Lady Hermione whispered. "It's been returned. But these other things, I've never seen them before. That photograph—" She swayed, and Sir Reginald caught her, lowering her into a chair. "Benson, fetch some water. Dr. Thornley." Dr. Thornley appeared, slightly out of breath, and attended to Lady Hermione. The others crowded in the doorway, confused and concerned. Poirot, however, approached the dressing table and examined the objects without touching them. The miniature was exactly as Lady Hermione had described, an 18th century piece of considerable beauty. The pearls were modest but genuine, but it was the photograph that held his attention. The young man in uniform stared out from the image with serious eyes. The photograph was old, perhaps 40 years or more, and slightly faded. On the back in pencil someone had written, V.N. Delhi, 1891. "Does anyone recognize this young man?" Poirot asked quietly. There was silence. Then Dr. Thornley, very pale, said, "May I see it?" He took the photograph with a hand that trembled. For a long moment he stared at it, and something, pain, guilt, fear, moved across his face. I think this may be. But no, it cannot be. "Gerald!" Sir Reginald said sharply. "Do you know who this is?" "I'm not certain. It's been so many years." Dr. Thornley set down the photograph as though it burned him. "Lady Hermione should rest. The shock." Yes, of course." Sir Reginald turned to his wife. "Hermione, my dear, you must lie down. This is all most distressing." Lady Hermione allowed herself to be led away, but not before giving Poirot a look of desperate appeal. The house party disbanded in confusion. The treasure hunt was abandoned. Miss Vane, who had appeared at the commotion, stood smoking in the corridor, her expression thoughtful. Maurice had vanished entirely. Poirot gathered the 3 objects carefully, wrapping them in his handkerchief. "Hastings," he said quietly, "find out where everyone was when that cry came. Everyone. And tell me exactly what they say." While Hastings conducted his inquiries, Poirot returned to his room and examined the objects minutely. The miniature showed no signs of having been hidden or mistreated. The pearls were perfectly ordinary, but the photograph, that was different. He studied it under the light, noting the studio mark on the back. Ranjit Studios, Delhi. The date, 1891, was significant. Sir Reginald would have been a young man then, perhaps newly arrived in India, and the initials VN. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Hastings, notebook in hand. "Well, old boy, what did you discover?" Hastings consulted his notes. "Right. Sir Reginald was in the garden with Dr. Thornley. They both confirm it. The Whitmores were together by the pond. Miss Vane was in the drawing room, writing letters. The maid confirms seeing her there. Maurice is a problem. No one seems to know where he was. He wasn't in his room, wasn't in the public rooms. Most interesting. And the Count, of course, had already departed. Yes, first thing this morning. Then we are left with an interesting situation, mon ami." Someone entered Lady Hermione's room in broad daylight during the treasure hunt when the house was in confusion, and arranged these objects with deliberate intent. But why? To frighten her? To send a message? The message on that note said secrets couldn't remain hidden. Perhaps someone's trying to expose some old scandal. Perhaps. But whose scandal? And what is the connection to that photograph? Poirot rose and paced the room. There is something here, Hastings, something from long ago that will not rest. And I fear, yes, I fear greatly, that before this matter is resolved, There will be more than mysterious messages and returned miniatures. You don't think. I think, Poirot said gravely, that in this house the past is reaching out to claim the present. And when the past contains secrets and lies, the result is often most unfortunate. That evening dinner was a subdued affair. Lady Hermione did not appear, keeping to her room with what was described as a severe nervous headache. Sir Reginald presided with stiff courtesy, but his usual genial manner was strained. Miss Vane made an effort at conversation, discussing her latest novel with determined brightness. The Whitmores contributed little. Mr. Whitmore absorbed in his own thoughts, while his wife cast anxious glances at her husband. Maurice toyed with his food and drank rather too much wine. Dr. Thornley was silent and pale. "I do hope Hermione will be recovered by tomorrow," Sir Reginald said during a lull. "She was looking forward to this house party so much." "These nervous attacks can be quite debilitating," Dr. Thornley offered. "I've given her a mild sedative. She should sleep soundly." "Good of you, Gerald. Don't know what we'd do without you." But Poirot noticed that Dr. Thornley did not meet Sir Reginald's eyes. After dinner, the party dispersed early. No one seemed inclined to linger. Hastings and Poirot found themselves alone in the drawing room with brandy and cigars. "Queer atmosphere," Hastings remarked. "Everyone's on edge, with reason, I think. Today's incident has shaken them all, but perhaps not in the way one might expect. Consider, Hastings, the objects that appeared in Lady Hermione's room. They were not random. They were chosen specifically, arranged deliberately. Someone is telling a story." "What sort of story?" "A story about the past. The miniature that was stolen and returned. That speaks of something taken and given back, yes, but also of family inheritance lineage. The pearls, they suggest a gift, perhaps, or a payment. And the photograph?" Poirot drew on his cigar thoughtfully. "The photograph is the key. Vienne, Delhi, 1891. Who was this young man, and why does his image cause such reaction?" Dr. Thornley recognized him, or thought he did. Precisely. Dr. Thornley was in India during that period. He knows something that frightens him. Should we speak to him? Not yet. Tonight, I wish to do something else. I wish to examine Sir Reginald's study more carefully. Come, mon ami. We shall do a little investigation while the house sleeps. Break into his study? Poirot, I say. We do not break. We merely borrow. The door was unlocked this afternoon during the treasure hunt. Perhaps it remains so. It did. The house was dark and silent as they crept down the stairs. Poirot carried a small electric torch, and by its light they made their way to Sir Reginald's study. The room was exactly as they had left it that afternoon. Poirot moved to the desk and began examining the papers there with methodical precision. "What are we looking for?" Hastings whispered. "We shall know when we find it." Most of the documents were routine, household accounts, correspondence about estate matters, but in a locked drawer, which Poirot opened with a skill that made Hastings's eyes widen, they found something more interesting. It was a bundle of letters tied with black ribbon, yellow with age. Poirot untied them carefully and examined the first few. They were in French, written in a flowing feminine hand. "Mon cher ami," Poirot read softly, "I can no longer bear the weight of this secret." "Good Lord! Who are they from?" "They are unsigned. But see, the paper, the ink, they date from many years ago. 40 years, perhaps more?" He carefully photographed several of the letters with a small camera he had brought, then retied them and replaced them exactly as they had been. "Now, let us see what else there is." Behind the portrait, the safe beckoned. Poirot examined it thoughtfully. It was a good safe, but not an exceptional one, and Poirot had opened many safes in his career. Oh. Poirot, I really don't think... Shh! The little grey cells! They tell me that in this safe is something important, and if we are to prevent tragedy, we must know what it is. With delicate manipulation, he worked at the combination. Minutes passed. Then, with a soft click, the safe door swung open. Inside were various documents, deeds, bonds, papers of value. But what caught Poirot's attention was a small leather box at the back. He drew it out and opened it. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, were military medals. The India General Service Medal, the Queen's South Africa Medal, and beneath them, another photograph. This one showed two young men in uniform, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. One was unmistakably a young Sir Reginald. The other, the same man from the photograph in Lady Hermione's room. Hastings breathed. Yes, VN. But who was he? And what happened to him? Poirot was about to examine the photograph more closely when they heard a sound from the hallway. Footsteps and voices. Quickly! Poirot replaced everything in the safe and closed it silently. They slipped out the French windows onto the terrace just as the study door opened. Through the window, they saw Sir Reginald and Dr. Thornley enter. Both men looked agitated. I tell you, Reggie, this has gone too far, Dr. Thornley was saying. When that photograph appeared today, my God, I nearly had apoplexy. If anyone realizes, no one will realize anything, Sir Reginald said harshly. It was 40 years ago, Gerald. 40 years. Who could possibly know? But someone does know. Someone is deliberately trying to what? Expose us? Blackmail us? For something that happened before you and I were even married to our wives. It wasn't just anything, Reggie. A man died. There was a terrible silence. Then Sir Reginald spoke, his voice low and cold. An accident, Gerald. It was ruled an accident. The inquiry found what we told them to find. But we both know the truth. And now someone else knows it too. That's impossible. There were only 3 people who knew what really happened that night. You, me, and Hermione. Dr. Thornley finished. Your wife knew, Reggie. You told her eventually, didn't you? Years later, yes, and she's never betrayed that confidence. Then who? Who is doing this? I don't know, but I intend to find out. And when I do... Sir Reginald's voice trailed off ominously. The 2 men remained in the study, speaking in lower tones that Poirot could not make out. After several minutes, they emerged and went their separate ways. Poirot and Hastings waited in the darkness of the terrace, scarcely breathing. Good Lord, Poirot, Hastings whispered finally. Did you hear that? A man died, and they covered it up. So it would seem. Come, we must return to our rooms before we are discovered. They crept back through the silent house. Once safely in Poirot's room, Hastings burst out. What are we going to do? Shouldn't we inform the police? If a man was killed 40 years ago, Hastings, whatever happened occurred in India in 1891 and was ruled an accident at the time. We have no evidence of any crime, only the overheard conversation of 2 frightened men. But I agree that something terrible happened. Something that has haunted Sir Reginald and Dr. Thornley for 4 decades. And now someone is using that knowledge to torment them. Or perhaps to threaten them. The question is who? And what do they want? Could it be Count Vasiliev? He seemed rather mysterious. Possibly. Or Maurice, who needs money and knows he will inherit. Or Miss Vane, who observes everything and writes about secrets for a living. Or even the Whitmores. Mr. Whitmore is clearly frightened of something. and his wife watches him like a hawk. What do we do now? Now we sleep, mon ami. Or rather, I sleep. You perhaps will be too agitated, but tomorrow, I think, the crisis will come, and we must be ready. But Poirot was wrong about the timing. The crisis came that very night. At precisely 3 o'clock in the morning, Hastings was jerked awake by a piercing scream that seemed to tear through the entire house. He stumbled from his bed, pulled on his dressing gown, and rushed into the corridor. Lights were appearing everywhere. Doors were flung open. Sir Reginald appeared in his nightshirt, looking haggard and old. Miss Vane emerged, her grey hair in a long plait, a wrapper thrown over her nightgown. The Whitmores came from their room, Mrs. Whitmore sobbing hysterically. The scream had come from the floor below. They rushed down the stairs in a confused crowd and found Lady Hermione in the entrance hall, standing at the foot of the grand staircase in her dressing gown, her hand pressed to her mouth in horror. She was staring at the library door, which stood open. "Gerald," she whispered. "Oh, dear God, Gerald!" Sir Reginald pushed past her and entered the library. Then he stopped dead, his face going grey. Poirot arrived at that moment, fully dressed. He had not undressed at all, having anticipated something of this sort. He moved quickly past the others and into the library. Dr. Gerald Thornley sat slumped in the leather chair by the fireplace. His head had fallen back, his eyes were open and staring, and his face was a terrible mottled purple. On the small table beside him stood a glass of brandy, half consumed, and beside it a small bottle. Poirot bent over the body, feeling for a pulse he knew he would not find. Then he straightened and addressed the horrified group in the doorway. "Mesdames, messieurs, I regret to inform you that Dr. Thornley is dead, and unless I am very much mistaken, he has been poisoned." The hours that followed were ones of controlled chaos. Sir Reginald, with admirable composure considering the circumstances, took charge. The local police were summoned. The servants were roused and gathered in the kitchen. The guests were requested, politely but firmly, to remain in their rooms until the authorities arrived. But before the police inspector arrived from the village, Poirot, with Sir Reginald's somewhat reluctant permission, conducted his own preliminary examination of the scene. The library remained exactly as they had found it. Dr. Thornley's body sat in grim testimony to sudden death. Poirot moved around the room with delicate precision, touching nothing but observing everything. "The brandy," he murmured to Hastings, who had been allowed to accompany him. "You see, about half is drunk. And this bottle—" He bent to examine the small bottle beside the glass. It contained, I think, some kind of sleeping draught or tonic. The label has been removed. You think the poison was in the brandy or the tonic? That, mon ami, we shall discover. But observe, the decanter of brandy stands on the sideboard there, untouched. So either Dr. Thornley poured his drink earlier and brought it here, or someone brought it to him. Lady Hermione found him. She might have done many things, yes, but consider the timing. It is now shortly after 3 o'clock. The body is still warm, but growing rigid. I estimate death occurred between 1 and 2 o'clock this morning. Lady Hermione's scream woke us at 3. What was she doing in the entrance hall at that hour? Perhaps she couldn't sleep and came down for a book. Perhaps. We shall ask her. Poirot continued his examination. And look here on the desk. Papers have been disturbed. See how they are scattered? Someone has been searching for something. The killer. Or Dr. Thornley himself before he died. Tell me, Hastings, when a man is poisoned, what does he do in his final moments? Well, I suppose he'd cry out, try to get help. Exactly. Yet no one heard a sound until Lady Hermione screamed. Either Dr. Thornley died very quickly, which some poisons do cause, or he was unable to call out. But if he was unable to call out, why did he not ring the bell? Poirot pointed to the bell pull beside the fireplace, easily within reach. No, my friend. I think Dr. Thornley was either unconscious very quickly, or he knew he was dying and chose not to summon help. Suicide, you mean? It is a possibility we must consider. The local inspector arrived shortly before dawn, a solid, competent man named Inspector Marsh, who had the good sense to defer to Poirot once he understood who he was dealing with. "Heard of you, sir, naturally," Marsh said, shaking Poirot's hand. "Scotland Yard speaks very highly of you. Happy to have your assistance on this matter. Nasty business. Very nasty." Together they examined the body, now stiffening in full rigor mortis. Inspector Marsh sniffed at the glass of brandy. "Bitter almonds," he said grimly. "Cyanide, I'll wager. Quick-acting stuff. Poor fellow wouldn't have had a chance. Indeed. And the bottle? I'll have it analyzed, but my guess is it contained some harmless sleeping draught. The cyanide was in the brandy, just enough to disguise the taste until too late. You are experienced, Inspector. Tell me, does this appear to you to be suicide or murder?" Inspector Marsh scratched his chin thoughtfully. "That's the question, isn't it? No note, which is unusual for suicide. But then again, medical men have easy access to poisons and know how to use them. Could go either way. Then let us interview the household and see what light they can shed." The interviews were conducted in Sir Reginald's study, with Inspector Marsh leading the questioning and Poirot sitting quietly to one side, his green eyes missing nothing. Lady Hermione went first, supported by her husband. She was pale but composed, though her hands trembled as she twisted her handkerchief. "I couldn't sleep," she explained. "I had taken the sedative Dr. Thornley gave me, but it didn't seem to help. I kept thinking about the things that have been happening. Finally, about 3 o'clock, I decided to come down and fetch a book. As I passed the library, I saw the door was open and the light was on. I looked in and saw," she shuddered. "I saw Gerald in the chair, and I knew immediately something was terribly wrong. His face was such a dreadful colour. I screamed, and then everyone came running." "You did not enter the room?" Poirot asked gently. "No, I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen." "And you did not touch anything?" "Nothing. I swear it. Thank you, Lady Hermione. You have been most helpful." Sir Reginald confirmed his wife's account. He had been asleep in his room and was woken by her scream. He had no idea what Dr. Thornley might have been doing in the library at that hour. Gerald sometimes had trouble sleeping, he admitted. The war, you know. He saw things in India that haunted him. He often sat up late reading or drinking. But poison! He shook his head. I can't believe he would take his own life. He was in good spirits earlier, Inspector Marsh asked. A flicker of something, guilt, fear, crossed Sir Reginald's face. He was troubled. We all were after the incident with my wife's belongings, but I had no sense that he was contemplating anything desperate. Maurice was next, sullen and defensive. He had been asleep, he insisted, and knew nothing until awakened by his aunt's scream. No, he had no idea why Dr. Thornley might have killed himself, or why anyone might have wanted to kill him. The man was dull as ditch water, Maurice said callously. I can't imagine him having enemies. Miss Vane was more thoughtful. She admitted she had been awake, working on her novel. I'm a terrible insomniac, she explained. I often write through the night. I heard nothing unusual until Lady Hermione screamed. My room is in the east wing, quite far from the library. You were writing in your room? Poirot asked. Yes, why do you ask? No reason, mademoiselle, merely establishing the facts. but Poirot noticed that Miss Vane's fingers bore no ink stains, and her manuscript pages, which she had brought down with her in the confusion, were suspiciously pristine. The Whitmores presented a picture of united bewilderment. They had both been asleep and had heard nothing. Mr. Whitmore seemed genuinely shocked by Dr. Thornley's death, while Mrs. Whitmore simply wept quietly into her handkerchief. When the interviews concluded, Inspector Marsh sat back with a sigh. "Well, Monsieur Poirot, what do you make of it all?" "I make of it that everyone in this house is lying," Poirot said calmly. "Oh, not about everything, but each person is concealing something. The question is whether anyone is concealing murder. You think it was murder, then? Not suicide?" "I am certain it was murder." Dr. Thornley was not the type to take his own life. He was frightened, yes, but not suicidal. And there is the matter of the missing papers. Missing papers? The desk in the library. It had been searched. Someone was looking for something either before or after Dr. Thornley's death. What were they seeking? Documents? Evidence? We must find out. "I'll have my men search the house," Inspector Marsh said. "With your permission, Inspector, I would like to conduct my own investigation. The little grey cells, they work best when unencumbered by official procedure." Inspector Marsh smiled. "Be my guest, Monsieur Poirot. Lord knows I can use all the help I can get." Over breakfast, a grim meal with little appetite displayed, Poirot observed the remaining guests carefully. Sir Reginald sat at the head of the table, his face drawn and aged. Lady Hermione barely touched her tea. Maurice read the newspaper with studied indifference, though Poirot noticed his hands shook slightly as he turned the pages. Miss Vane and the Whitmores were also present, forming a tableau of awkward mourning. "I suppose we'll be required to stay," Maurice said finally. "The police and all that. Inspector Marsh has requested that no one leave until the inquest," Sir Reginald confirmed. "I hope that won't inconvenience anyone too greatly." "Inconvenience!" Mrs. Whitmore burst out suddenly. "A man is dead and you speak of inconvenience. What is happening in this house? What terrible secrets?" She broke off, seeing her husband's warning look. "My wife is overwrought," Mr. Whitmore said stiffly. "She should rest." "Perhaps we should all rest," Miss Vane suggested. "This has been a terrible shock." But Poirot noticed that her eyes were alert and calculating, like those of a writer storing material for future use. After breakfast, Poirot drew Hastings aside. "Come, mon ami, we must investigate further. There is something I wish to examine in Dr. Thornley's room." They made their way to the guest wing, where Dr. Thornley had been staying. Inspector Marsh had already conducted a cursory search, but Poirot's examination was far more thorough. The room was neat, almost austere. Dr. Thornley's clothes hung in the wardrobe, his shaving kit laid out precisely in the bathroom. On the nightstand lay a well-thumbed Bible and a bottle of sleeping tablets. "Look at this, Hastings." Poirot held up the bottle. "It is 3/4 full, yet Dr. Thornley was supposed to have difficulty sleeping. Why would he not take these tablets? Perhaps he preferred brandy. Perhaps. Or perhaps he feared to sleep too deeply. A man who is frightened, Hastings, he does not wish to be unconscious and vulnerable." In the drawer of the nightstand, Poirot found a leather-bound journal. He opened it carefully, his eyes scanning the cramped handwriting. "Ah, this is most illuminating. Listen, I can no longer bear the weight of this secret. Reggie insists we must never speak of it. But the guilt gnaws at me like a cancer. If only I could make amends. But how does one make amends for such a terrible thing? When was that written? 2 weeks ago. And here, more recently, someone knows. I'm certain of it now. The photograph that appeared in Hermione's room. It was no accident. Someone is playing a cruel game, and I fear where it will end. So he knew someone was threatening them. Undoubtedly. And the final entry dated yesterday. I must speak with Reggie tonight. This cannot continue. Whatever the cost, the truth must come out. It is the only way to end this nightmare. Poirot closed the journal thoughtfully. So Dr. Thornley had decided to confess, to admit whatever happened 40 years ago. And that very night he dies. Then someone killed him to keep him quiet. So it would appear. But who? Who knew what he was planning? And how did they administer the poison? They continued searching and found, hidden in the lining of Dr. Thornley's suitcase, a photograph. Another copy of the one that had appeared in Lady Hermione's room. On the back, in addition to the notation VN Delhi, 1891, someone had added in different ink, "Forgive me." "Forgive me," Poirot repeated softly. So Dr. Thornley was carrying this photograph, with a plea for forgiveness. But to whom was the plea addressed? To the dead man? To God? To himself? I say, Poirot, shouldn't we show this to Inspector Marsh? In time. First, I wish to have a conversation with Sir Reginald, a private conversation, where the truth, or at least some portion of it, might finally emerge. Poirot found Sir Reginald in the garden, standing by the ornamental pond and staring at the water with unseeing eyes. The morning sun cast a golden light over the formal parterres, but there was no peace in the scene. "Sir Reginald," Poirot said quietly, "I must speak with you. It is of the utmost importance." The older man turned, and Poirot was shocked by the change in him. In the space of a few hours, Sir Reginald seemed to have aged a decade. His shoulders sagged, and his eyes held a haunted look. "I suppose you know," Sir Reginald said dully, "or have guessed, Gerald's death. It's because of what happened in India, isn't it?" "I believe so, yes. Will you tell me about it? All of it?" Sir Reginald was silent for a long moment. Then, with a heavy sigh, he gestured to a stone bench beneath a willow tree. "I suppose it's time the truth came out. God knows I've carried it long enough." They sat, and Sir Reginald began to speak, his voice flat and weary. "It was in 1891. I was young, newly posted to Delhi, full of idealism and ambition. I had a friend, a fellow officer named Victor Novak. We called him Vic. He was Austrian by birth, but had come to England as a child. Brilliant fellow, charming, brave. We were inseparable. That year there was unrest in the region. Nothing serious, minor tribal disputes, but enough to keep us on edge. Vic and I were sent with a small patrol to investigate reports of arms smuggling. Gerald Thornley was our medical officer. We found evidence of smuggling all right, but we also found something else. One of the local British traders was involved, a man named Carruthers. He was making a fortune selling rifles to both sides. Vic was furious. He wanted to report it immediately, have Carruthers arrested and court-martialed. But there was a problem. Carruthers was well connected. His family had influence back in London. And God help me, I was ambitious. I knew that if we exposed Carruthers, his family would use their influence to bury the scandal, and us along with it. Our careers would be over before they'd begun. So I convinced Vic to wait, to gather more evidence, I said, to build an airtight case. But really, I was stalling, hoping the problem would somehow resolve itself. Sir Reginald paused, his hands trembling. Poirot waited in silence. We arranged to meet Carruthers one night, at an old fort outside the city. Vic, Gerald, and I. We were going to confront him, give him a chance to cease his activities quietly. But Carruthers brought men with him, hired thugs. There was a fight. In the confusion, someone fired a shot. Vic was hit. He fell from the ramparts of the fort. Gerald and I got to him, but But it was too late. He died in my arms, asking me to write to his sister in Vienna, to tell her he loved her. Tears were running down Sir Reginald's cheeks now. Unheeded, we should have reported it as it happened, but we were terrified. Carruthers was killed in the fight. His own men shot him, we think, trying to hit us. With both men dead, Gerald and I decided to say it had been an accident. A fall during a routine patrol. No mention of smuggling, no mention of Carruthers. We buried our friend and our integrity together. The inquiry accepted our account. Vic's death was ruled accidental. His sister, her name was Valentina. She wrote to me, thanking me for being with her brother at the end. I've never felt such shame. And the photograph? Poirot prompted gently. I kept it all these years. A reminder of my guilt. I loved Vic like a brother, and I let him die because of my ambition. Gerald felt the same. It's haunted us both for 40 years. Lady Hermione knew. I told her years later, when the nightmares became too much to bear alone. She's been my confessor and my comfort, but we never spoke of it to anyone else. Until now, Poirot said. Until someone began to unearth the past. Tell me, did Victor Novak have any family besides the sister? Not that I know of. Valentina married, I believe. She sent me a wedding announcement once, but I couldn't bear to respond. The guilt was too great, and her married name? I don't recall. It was Russian, I think, or perhaps Polish. It was so long ago, but Poirot's mind was racing. A Russian name, a sister who married, and Count Vasiliev, the mysterious Russian émigré who had appeared at Willowmere and departed so suddenly. Sir Reginald, Poirot said carefully, I must ask you a difficult question. Did you or Dr. Thornley ever mention this matter to anyone else? Anyone at all? Never. We took a blood oath, Gerald and I, that we would carry the secret to our graves. Sir Reginald's voice broke, and now Gerald has done exactly that. There is one more thing I must know. The letters in your desk, the French letters, tied with black ribbon. They are from Lady Hermione. Sir Reginald looked startled. How did you? Yes, from early in our marriage, when I was posted to Argentina. She wrote to me in French. She thought it was romantic. But what could those letters have to do with this? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps everything. I must think, Sir Reginald. The little grey cells. They need time to arrange all the pieces of this puzzle. Poirot returned to the house to find Hastings waiting for him with news. Poirot, the post has arrived. There's a letter for you, marked urgent. The letter was from Poirot's contacts at Scotland Yard, in response to a telegram he had sent the previous day, inquiring about Count Vasiliev. He read it quickly, his eyebrows rising. Most interesting, Hastings. It seems our mysterious Count is not what he appears. His real name is Peter Novak, and he is indeed related to Victor Novak. He is the son of Valentina Novak, Victor's sister. She married a Polish émigré named Vasiliev, but he died young. The son took his stepfather's title, which was spurious to begin with, and has been living by his wits in London for the past 10 years. Good Lord! So he's Victor Novak's nephew? Precisely. And he came to Willowmere with a purpose, to expose the truth about his uncle's death. The question is, how much did he know? And did he kill Dr. Thornley to achieve his revenge? But he left before the murder, did he? Or did he merely pretend to leave? Inspector Marsh, I think, should telegraph the London hotels immediately. We must find Monsieur Lecomte. But before they could act on this, there was a commotion from the entrance hall. Miss Vane's voice, raised in alarm, brought them running. They found her standing at the foot of the stairs, her face pale, clutching a sheet of notepaper. Monsieur Poirot! This was pushed under my door just now. Someone in this house is threatening me. Poirot took the note carefully. Like the first message to Lady Hermione, it was written in block capitals on good quality paper. Beware, Miss Vane. Those who write about murder may find themselves living it. Leave Willowmere today if you value your life. When did you find this? Poirot demanded. Just now. I went to my room to fetch a book, and there it was on the floor. Oh, Monsieur Poirot, I'm frightened. First Dr. Thornley, and now this. Who could be doing these terrible things? That, mademoiselle, is what I intend to discover. But I must ask you, have you been investigating matters yourself? Perhaps researching the history of Willowmere for a future novel? Miss Vane looked uncomfortable. Well, I may have asked a few questions. In the village, you know, about the Ashford family. It's what writers do. We gather material wherever we can. And what did you discover? Nothing much. Just that Sir Reginald had a scandal in his past. Something hushed up in India. But I didn't learn any details. And yet someone fears what you might learn. Or perhaps someone wishes to implicate you in Dr. Thornley's death. By making it appear you are being threatened, when in fact you are the threatener. Miss Vane gasped. You think I killed Dr. Thornley? That's absurd. I think, mademoiselle, that in this house everyone is suspect until proven otherwise. Now, if you will excuse me, I have much work to do. As Miss Vane retreated, looking both offended and frightened, Inspector Marsh appeared with grave news. Monsieur Poirot, we've found something disturbing in Maurice Ashford's room, hidden in his wardrobe. A bottle of cyanide, medical grade, with the label removed. Maurice Ashford? But why would he kill Dr. Thornley? That's what we need to find out. I've had him brought to the study for questioning. Maurice Ashford faced them with a mixture of defiance and fear. He was clearly terrified, but trying to bluff his way through. I don't know anything about that bottle. Someone must have planted it in my room. That is a convenient explanation, Poirot observed. But you must admit, Mr. Ashford, that you had motive to wish harm to this household. You are deeply in debt, are you not? And you stand to inherit Willowmere upon your uncle's death. What? No! I mean, yes, I'm in debt, but I would never. And Dr. Thornley, had you any quarrel with him? None. I barely knew the man. He was just some old friend of Uncle Reggie's. Indeed. Then perhaps you can explain why you were not in your room last night when Dr. Thornley was killed. Where were you, Mr. Ashford? Maurice's face flushed red. He looked at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. I was in Miss Vane's room. We were talking. There was a shocked silence. Talking, Poirot repeated flatly. Yes. I went to her room around midnight. I wanted to apologize for my behavior. I've been making rather a fool of myself over her, and I wanted to set things right. We talked for about an hour. Then I returned to my room and went to bed. Miss Vane can corroborate this. I don't know if she will. She was rather angry with me. Told me to grow up and stop mooning about like a lovesick puppy. Maurice's voice was bitter. Not exactly the romantic evening I'd envisioned. Inspector Marsh sent for Miss Vane, who confirmed Maurice's story with obvious reluctance. Yes, he came to my room like an idiot. I thought it was highly improper, but he insisted on apologizing. We talked, or rather, I talked and he listened. I told him he needed to find some purpose in life, beyond racing cars and chasing women. Then I sent him away. I went to bed shortly after 1 o'clock and slept until that dreadful scream woke us all. And the cyanide in Mr. Ashford's room? Inspector Marsh pressed. I know nothing about it. If it's there, someone else put it there. Maurice may be a fool, but I don't believe he's a murderer. After they left, Poirot sat in thoughtful silence. Hastings could almost hear the little grey cells working furiously. Well, Hastings said finally, what do you think? I think, mon ami, that we are approaching the crisis. The web tightens, and soon the spider at the center will be revealed. But first, there are 2 more people I must interview, Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore. Come. They found the Whitmores in the morning room, sitting close together like frightened children. Mr. Whitmore's hands shook as he cleaned his spectacles, while Mrs. Whitmore dabbed at her eyes with a sodden handkerchief. "Monsieur Poirot," Mr. Whitmore said nervously, "I suppose you want to question us about poor Dr. Thornley, if you would be so kind. But first, I am curious about your own history with Willowmere. You have been neighbours of the Ashfords for many years." 20 years or more, Mr. Whitmore confirmed. "We inherited our estate from my uncle. Reggie, Sir Reginald, was kind enough to welcome us when we arrived. We've been friends ever since. And yet, Mr. Whitmore, you are not comfortable here at the moment. Something troubles you. I see it in your manner, in the way you start at every sound. What is it you fear?" Mr. Whitmore and his wife exchanged glances. Then slowly, Mr. Whitmore spoke. "Last week I received a letter. Anonymous. It said that unless I paid £5,000, certain facts about my past would be revealed to the village. Facts that would ruin me." "What facts?" Poirot asked gently. I was accused of a crime many years ago, embezzlement from my previous employer. The charges were dropped. There was no real evidence, and I believe I was framed by a rival. But the scandal followed me. That's why we moved to Surrey to escape it. If it were dredged up again, you would be socially destroyed. I understand. And have you paid this money?" "No, I was trying to raise it, but £5,000 is a considerable sum. And then Dr. Thornley died, and I wondered if perhaps he too was being blackmailed, if perhaps we were all victims of the same villain." "It is a possibility," Poirot agreed. "And you have no idea who sent this letter?" "None. It was posted from London." "Most interesting. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. You have been most helpful." As they left the Whitmores, Hastings turned to Poirot with excitement. "Blackmail! So that's what this is all about. Someone has been blackmailing everyone. Lady Hermione about the secrets from India, Mr. Whitmore about his past scandal, perhaps even Maurice about his debts." "Perhaps," Poirot said, "but blackmail, Hastings, requires a certain delicacy. One must know when to press and when to release pressure. The blackmailer who drives his victims to desperation is a foolish blackmailer. He risks exposure, or, as in this case, violence. And I ask myself, who among our suspects has the knowledge, the cunning, and the ruthlessness to orchestrate such a scheme? Count Vasiliev, or Peter Novak as he really is? It is the obvious answer, but I mistrust the obvious. The real murderer, Hastings, is often not the one who appears most suspicious, but the one who appears least so. Come, we must speak with Lady Hermione once more. There is something she has not told us, something crucial, and I believe that now, with Dr. Thornley dead and the situation desperate, she will be willing to reveal it." They found Lady Hermione in her sitting room, staring out of the window at the gardens. She looked haggard, her elegant facade crumbling under the weight of fear and grief. "Lady Hermione," Poirot said, closing the door behind them, "I must speak with you most seriously. Dr. Thornley was murdered to silence him. Of that I am now certain, and I believe you are in danger as well. But I cannot protect you unless you tell me the complete truth. Everything. No more evasions." Lady Hermione turned to face him, and he saw in her eyes the relief of one who has carried a burden too long alone. "You're right, of course. I should have told you everything from the beginning, but I was so ashamed, so frightened of what people would think. The past, madam, it is past. What matters now is preventing another death, perhaps your own. Now, please, begin at the beginning." Lady Hermione sank into a chair and folded her hands in her lap, as though preparing to recite a difficult lesson. Reginald told you about Victor Novak, I presume. He has told me the truth about what happened in India, yes. Then you know about the guilt he's carried all these years. What you may not know is that I met Victor Novak's sister, Valentina, many years later. It was in London in 1920. I was at a charity event, and we were introduced. She had no idea who I was, of course, just another society woman. We became friends. She was a widow by then, struggling to raise her son alone. Her husband, a Polish count, had died in the war. She was charming, educated, cultured, and completely innocent of any malice. I wanted to tell her the truth, but Reginald forbade it. He said it would only cause pain, that the past was buried. But the secret ate at me. And then, about 6 months ago, I received a letter from Valentina's son, Peter Vasiliev, as he now called himself. He had discovered certain facts about his uncle's death and was making inquiries. He asked if he might visit me to discuss his uncle's service with my husband. I was terrified. I consulted with Reginald, who decided the best course was to invite Peter here, to judge what he knew and what he wanted. So I extended the invitation to the house party. And Count Vasiliev accepted, Poirot said. But decay. He came here with the intention of exposing the truth about his uncle's death. But what changed? Why did he leave so suddenly? I don't know. That telegram. He showed me a portion of it after the others had gone. It said his mother, Valentina, had fallen gravely ill in London. He had to go to her immediately. And this was true? I have no idea. I assume so. Why would he lie? Why indeed, Poirot murmured. Unless, Lady Hermione, the telegram was not what it appeared. Unless someone sent it to lure him away from Willowmere at a crucial moment. But who? And why? That is what I intend to discover. Now, Lady Hermione, I must ask you about the photograph. The one of Victor Novak. You say it appeared on your dressing table. But you had seen that photograph before, had you not? Lady Hermione flushed. Yes, years ago Reginald showed it to me. It was in his safe. But I swear I never took it, never showed it to anyone. Then someone else accessed your husband's safe. Someone who knew the combination, or was skilled at opening locks. And they took the photograph for a specific purpose. To frighten you. To send a message. What message? That the past was not buried. That secrets would be revealed. That judgment so long delayed would finally come. Lady Hermione shivered. You make it sound so biblical. Does not the Bible speak of sins being visited upon the generations? Of secrets crying out from the grave? Perhaps, madame, this is not merely a case of blackmail or revenge. Perhaps this is about something deeper. About guilt and punishment, truth and justice. There was a knock at the door, and Inspector Marsh entered, his face grave. Monsieur Poirot, I have news. We've located Count Vasiliev, or rather, Peter Novak. He never went to London. He's been staying at an inn in the village, under an assumed name. My men are bringing him here now. Excellent! And his mother? Is she ill? There's no record of a Valentina Vasiliev being admitted to any London hospital. The telegram appears to have been a fabrication. Then someone lured him away deliberately. But why? To implicate him in Dr. Thornley's murder? Or, Poirot paused, struck by a sudden thought, or to provide him with an alibi. Before anyone could respond to this cryptic remark, there was a commotion downstairs. Raised voices. The sound of a scuffle. They rushed down to find Count Vasiliev, Peter Novak, being restrained by 2 policemen. His face was wild, his clothes disheveled. Let me go! I have done nothing. I am innocent. Bring him to the study, Inspector Marsh commanded. In the study, with Sir Reginald present, Peter Novak faced his accusers. Shorn of his aristocratic pretensions, he looked younger, more vulnerable. A man driven by grief and anger rather than cold calculation. "Mr. Novak," Poirot said quietly, "let us have the truth. You came to Willowmere to expose what happened to your uncle. You believed Sir Reginald and Dr. Thornley were responsible for his death. Is this not so?" "Yes." The word burst from Novak like a confession. "My mother told me on her deathbed the real circumstances of my uncle's death. She had always suspected the official story was false. She had her brother's letters, you see, written shortly before he died. In them, he mentioned discovering smuggling, mentioned confronting someone powerful. Then suddenly he was dead. An accident, they said. But my mother never believed it. I've spent years investigating. I tracked down old service records, spoke to veterans who'd served in Delhi. Piece by piece, I assembled the truth. And yes, I came here intending to expose Sir Reginald and Dr. Thornley for the liars they were. Yet you did not," Poirot observed. "Instead you left. Because of the telegram. My mother was dying, or so I believed. I had to go to her. But when I reached London, I discovered there was no telegram, no illness. It was a trick to get me away from Willowmere. I came back as quickly as I could to confront them. And now I find that Dr. Thornley is dead. And you expect us to believe you had nothing to do with his death?" Inspector Marsh said skeptically. "I wanted to expose them, yes. To see them humiliated, stripped of their honours. But murder, no. I'm not a killer." Poirot studied the young man carefully. "I believe you," he said finally. "You are many things, Mr. Novak, but you are not a murderer. However, someone wished you to appear guilty. Someone sent that false telegram, knowing you would rush away and appear suspicious. Someone is playing a very deep game indeed." "Then who?" Sir Reginald demanded. "Who killed Gerald and why?" "That, Sir Reginald, I am about to reveal. But first, I must ask you all to assemble in the drawing room in 1 hour. All the guests, all the suspects. It is time for the truth, all of the truth, to come out. Inspector Marsh, you will arrange it." "Of course, Monsieur Poirot." As the others dispersed, Hastings followed Poirot to their rooms. "Poirot, do you really know who the murderer is?" "But of course, mon ami. I have known for some time. The little grey cells, they have been most active. All the pieces of the puzzle, they fit together now. The blackmail, the threatening notes, the stolen miniature, the telegram, the cyanide, all part of one elaborate scheme." "But who? Who could have done it all?" "That," Poirot said with satisfaction, "you will learn in precisely 1 hour. Now I must prepare. The denouement, Hastings, requires proper staging. One must arrange the facts in their correct order, building to the final revelation. It is an art form, you understand, like the symphony, each movement leading to the grand finale. You're enjoying this. I take pride in my work, mon ami. Is that so wrong? Come now, we must dress. One does not accuse a murderer in casual attire." The hour that followed seemed interminable to Hastings. Poirot spent it in his room, making notes and murmuring to himself in French. Hastings paced nervously, smoking cigarette after cigarette. Finally, at precisely 4 o'clock, they descended to the drawing room. The suspects were all assembled, arranged in a semicircle as though awaiting judgment. Sir Reginald sat stiffly in an armchair, his face carved from stone. Lady Hermione perched beside him, her hands twisted together. Maurice lounged with false casualness near the window. Miss Vane sat upright, her notebook conspicuously visible on her lap. The Whitmores huddled together on the sofa. Peter Novak stood apart, his expression defiant. Inspector Marsh and his sergeant positioned themselves by the door, while Hastings took his customary seat to one side. Poirot stood before the fireplace, immaculate in his dark suit, his moustaches waxed to perfection. For a moment he said nothing, simply regarding the assembled company with those shrewd green eyes. Then, slowly, he began to speak. "Mesdames and messieurs," Poirot began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "We are gathered here to discuss a murder. The murder of Dr. Gerald Thornley, killed by cyanide poisoning in the library of this house 2 nights ago. But to understand this murder, we must first understand the events that led to it. Events that began not 2 nights ago, but 40 years ago in India." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. In 1891, in Delhi, a young officer named Victor Novak died. Officially, his death was ruled an accident. In truth, it was the result of a confrontation over an arms smuggling operation. Victor Novak died because he wished to expose a British trader who was profiting from illegal weapons sales. He died because 2 of his fellow officers, his friends, chose ambition over honor. They chose to lie about the circumstances of his death rather than risk their own careers. Those 2 officers were, of course, Sir Reginald Ashford and Dr. Gerald Thornley. Sir Reginald closed his eyes, but did not speak. For 40 years, these 2 men carried the burden of their guilt. They buried the truth and tried to forget. But the past, it does not forget. The past has a way of resurfacing, like a body that will not remain buried. 6 months ago, the past began to assert itself. Peter Novak, Victor's nephew, began investigating his uncle's death. He wrote to Lady Hermione requesting a meeting, and Lady Hermione, frightened of exposure, confided in her husband. This is when our murderer began to form their plan. You see, the murderer had learned the secret, how I will reveal shortly, and saw in it an opportunity, not for justice, not for revenge, but for profit. The murderer decided to use this knowledge to extract money through blackmail. But blackmail is a delicate art. One must approach the victim carefully, gradually increasing the pressure. So the murderer began with small actions. Objects moved in Lady Hermione's room. Papers disturbed. Then the miniature portrait was taken from her dressing table, not to keep it, but to establish a pattern of intrusion, to make Lady Hermione feel violated and afraid. Lady Hermione nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on Poirot. The next step was the threatening note. "The truth will come out. Secrets cannot remain hidden forever." This was delivered to Lady Hermione's pillow. A most intimate violation. The message was clear. "I know your secret, and I can reach you anywhere." But the masterstroke was yet to come. When Peter Novak was invited to Willowmere, the murderer saw an opportunity to intensify the pressure, while also setting up a scapegoat. The murderer took the photograph of Victor Novak from Sir Reginald's safe. Oh yes, the murderer had access to that safe, and arranged it with other objects on Lady Hermione's dressing table. This served 2 purposes. It reminded Lady Hermione that the past was not buried, and it made Peter Novak appear suspicious to everyone else. But who could have known about the photograph? Maurice burst out. Who could have opened Uncle Reggie's safe? An excellent question. Let us consider the suspects, Mr. Novak. Poirot gestured to Peter. He had motive, revenge for his uncle's death. He had knowledge. He had investigated the circumstances thoroughly. But did he have opportunity to commit all these acts? To move objects in Lady Hermione's room? To send her notes? To arrange the photograph? Nah, he was a guest here, closely observed. It would have been too risky. Peter Novak's shoulders sagged with relief. Mr. Maurice Ashford? He had motive, financial desperation. He knew he would inherit Willowmere upon Sir Reginald's death. But perhaps he grew tired of waiting. Perhaps he thought to blackmail his uncle and aunt. to extract money immediately. But Mr. Ashford's alibi for the night of the murder has been confirmed by Miss Vane. And more importantly, the cyanide found in his room was planted there. A clumsy attempt to frame him. Maurice looked both vindicated and confused. Miss Vane herself, she is a writer, trained in observation and plotting. She could certainly have devised such an elaborate scheme. But why would she? She had no connection to the events in India, no reason to blackmail anyone. And the threatening note she received, why threaten herself if she was the blackmailer? None. Miss Vane is innocent. Miss Vane inclined her head graciously. The Whitmores, then. The Whitmores present an interesting case. For you see, they too were being blackmailed. About Mr. Whitmore's past scandal. Would a blackmailer blackmail himself? Of course not. So the Whitmores also are innocent. Mr. Whitmore grasped his wife's hand, relief flooding his face. Which brings us, Poirot continued, his voice hardening, to the three people who were present 40 years ago in India. Sir Reginald Ashford, Dr. Gerald Thornley, and, he paused dramatically, Lady Hermione Ashford. A collective gasp filled the room. But Lady Hermione wasn't in India. Hastings protested. No, she was not present in India when Victor Novak died. But she was the recipient of her husband's confession. She knew the truth, and unlike Sir Reginald and Dr. Thornley, who were racked with genuine guilt, Lady Hermione saw only an opportunity. Consider the facts, mes amis. Who could move objects in Lady Hermione's own room without suspicion? Lady Hermione herself. Who could claim those objects had been moved, creating a narrative of intrusion and threat? Lady Hermione herself. Who had access to Sir Reginald's study, his safe, his private papers? His wife, of course. Lady Hermione orchestrated this entire affair. She stole her own miniature, and then found it returned along with the photograph, which she herself had taken from the safe. She wrote the threatening notes to herself to establish the pattern of being victimized. She even wrote the blackmail demands to Mr. Whitmore and others, using knowledge gleaned from decades in this social circle. But why did she do all this? For money, of course. Sir Reginald had been concerned about expenses. The estate required costly maintenance, and Lady Hermione, accustomed to luxury, saw a way to extract funds from multiple sources while appearing to be a victim herself. Lady Hermione sat very still, her face pale but composed. But then, Poirot continued, Dr. Thornley became a problem. His conscience troubled him more and more. In his journal, he wrote that the truth must come out, that he could no longer bear the guilt. Lady Hermione knew that if Dr. Thornley confessed, the entire scheme would collapse. Her blackmail operations would be exposed, along with the original scandal. She would be ruined, possibly imprisoned. So she decided Dr. Thornley must die. She arranged it carefully. On the night of the treasure hunt, when the house was in confusion, she went to Dr. Thornley's room and added cyanide to his sleeping draught, a bottle she herself had given him earlier, claiming it would help him rest. She knew he would take some brandy before bed, as was his habit, and that the cyanide in the bottle would mix with the brandy. But she needed an alibi, needed to ensure she would not be present when the body was discovered. So she pretended to have a headache and retired early. When she was certain Dr. Thornley was dead, she waited until well after midnight, then crept down to discover the body. Her scream woke the household, and everyone assumed she was the innocent discoverer, not the killer. Sir Reginald had risen to his feet, his face a mask of horror and disbelief. Hermione, no! This is insane! Hermione would never, but she would, Sir Reginald. And she did. The evidence is overwhelming. The bottle of cyanide found in Morris's room. It came from Lady Hermione's own medicine cabinet. Her personal maid will confirm this, as Inspector Marsh's men have already discovered. Lady Hermione planted it there to implicate her nephew, to provide an alternative suspect. The telegram that lured Peter Novak away, sent from the village post office, paid for with money from the household petty cash, which Lady Hermione controlled. The handwriting on the threatening notes. It is a disguised hand, yes, but certain letter formations match Lady Hermione's personal correspondence. Specifically, the French letters she wrote to her husband years ago, which I had the opportunity to examine. And finally, there is the matter of motive. Who benefited from all this chaos? Who was collecting blackmail money from multiple victims? The answer, Inspector Marsh will confirm, is Lady Hermione. A search of her private rooms has revealed a concealed bank account containing nearly £20,000. Money that cannot be accounted for by any legitimate means. Inspector Marsh stepped forward. It's true, I'm afraid. We found the bank book hidden in her dressing room, along with copies of the blackmail letters she had sent. Lady Hermione Ashford, I am arresting you for the murder of Dr. Gerald Thornley. For a long moment, Lady Hermione remained motionless. Then, slowly, she began to laugh, a harsh, bitter sound that had nothing of humour in it. Clever, Monsieur Poirot. Very clever. Yes, I did it. I killed Gerald. He was going to ruin everything, the sentimental old fool. All his talk of confession, of making amends. 40 years too late for amends. Better to let sleeping dogs lie, I always said. But no, he had to develop a conscience. Hermione! Sir Reginald gasped. How could you? How could I? Lady Hermione's voice was suddenly vicious. How could I, you ask? You who condemned me to a life of genteel poverty? You, with your noble guilt and your refusal to profit from your position. We could have been wealthy, Reginald. You could have accepted those bribes in Argentina, taken those opportunities in the Foreign Office. But no, you had to be honourable. Well, honour doesn't pay the bills, does it? Honour doesn't maintain a house like Willowmere. So you decided to sell our secrets, Poirot said quietly. To blackmail those around you. Why not? Everyone has secrets. Everyone has something they'd pay to keep hidden. Mr. Whitmore's embezzlement, the vicar's illegitimate child, the Ashworth's daughter's elopement. I knew them all, collected them over years of charity committees and dinner parties. And yes, I used them. Is that so wrong? I was only taking what should have been mine by right. And Dr. Thornley's life? Poirot asked. Was that yours to take as well? For the first time, Lady Hermione faltered. I didn't want to kill him, but he gave me no choice. He was going to confess everything. He would have destroyed us all. On the contrary, madam, Dr. Thornley's confession would have freed you all. The truth, painful as it might have been, would have lifted the burden you had carried for so long. But you could not see that. You saw only the threat to your schemes, your greed, and so you became not merely a blackmailer, but a murderer. Take her away, Inspector Marsh said quietly to his sergeant. As Lady Hermione was led from the room, Sir Reginald sank into his chair, his face buried in his hands. The others sat in stunned silence, processing the revelation. Finally, Peter Novak spoke, his voice shaking. My uncle, he died because of a lie, and now another man has died because of that same lie. Yes, Poirot said gently. The lie has claimed many victims over the years, but now at least the truth is known. Your uncle's death will be properly recorded. His honour will be restored. Small comfort, Peter said bitterly. Perhaps. But it is all we have, the truth and the knowledge that justice, however delayed, has finally been served. The inquest into Dr. Thornley's death concluded 3 days later. Lady Hermione Ashford was formally charged with murder and remanded to custody pending trial. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and even her solicitor admitted privately that her case was hopeless. Sir Reginald aged visibly during those days. He moved through Willowmere like a ghost, speaking to no one, eating little. The revelation of his wife's crimes had shattered him more thoroughly than any guilt over Victor Novak's death could have done. On their final morning at Willowmere, Poirot and Hastings walked together in the gardens. The spring flowers were in full bloom, and the formal parterres displayed their geometric perfection. But the beauty seemed hollow now, tainted by the tragedy that had unfolded within the house. "I still can hardly believe it," Hastings said, pausing by the ornamental pond, where they had found one of the treasure hunt clues. Lady Hermione seemed so respectable, so proper. Ah, but that is often the way, mon ami. The most respectable facade may conceal the darkest heart. Lady Hermione spent 40 years as the perfect society wife, gracious, charitable, devoted. But beneath that facade, resentment festered. She felt cheated by life, by her husband's principles, by the financial constraints of maintaining appearances. And so, when the opportunity presented itself, she transformed that resentment into action. But to kill a man who had been a friend to her husband for decades. Dr. Thornley represented a threat to everything she had built, not merely the blackmail scheme, which was lucrative, yes, but also dangerous. But her entire position. If the truth about Victor Novak's death emerged, if Sir Reginald were disgraced, what would become of Lady Hermione? She would lose her social standing, her home, her identity. She could not permit that. They walked on in silence until they reached the lower terrace, where Poirot had first noticed the disturbed paving stones. "What was she doing here that night?" Hastings asked. "When we saw the fresh earth." "Ah, that I have learned from the servants. Lady Hermione had buried certain incriminating documents here. Copies of the blackmail letters, records of payments received. She thought it safer than keeping them in the house. But after Peter Novak's arrival, she grew nervous and retrieved them, moving them to her dressing room. A fatal error, for that is where Inspector Marsh's men found them. The irony is that if she had simply done nothing, if she had let Sir Reginald and Dr. Thornley handle Peter Novak's inquiries in their own way, none of this would have happened. Precisely. But the blackmailer, Hastings, cannot resist the temptation to manipulate, to control. Lady Hermione saw Peter Novak's arrival as another opportunity to create chaos, to extract money, to demonstrate her power. She could not simply let events unfold naturally, and that hubris destroyed her. They found Sir Reginald in his study, signing documents. He looked up as they entered, and Poirot was struck by the change in him. The upright, dignified diplomat had been replaced by a broken old man. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, I wanted to thank you before you left. I know this has been difficult." "It is we who should thank you for your hospitality, Sir Reginald," Poirot said formally, "though the circumstances have been most unfortunate." "Unfortunate?" Sir Reginald gave a bitter laugh. "Yes, I suppose that's one word for it. My wife is a murderess and a blackmailer. My life has been built on a lie. The man I called my friend is dead because of secrets I helped create. Unfortunate seems rather inadequate. What will you do now?" Hastings asked gently. "I've been in contact with the Foreign Office. I'm making a full statement about Victor Novak's death. The truth, all of it. Let the consequences fall where they may. I should have done it 40 years ago. Gerald wanted to, near the end. If only I'd listened." "The past cannot be changed," Poirot said. "Only the future remains. And you are doing the honourable thing now, Sir Reginald. That must count for something, perhaps. I've also reached out to Peter Novak." I want to settle a sum on him, not as payment for his uncle's death, which cannot be paid for, but as a gesture. His mother will receive a formal apology as well, and the full truth about her brother's service and death. It's little enough, but it's all I can do." "It is more than many would do," Poirot observed, "and it speaks to your character, even if you do not see it yourself." Sir Reginald shook his head. "Character? I wonder if I have any left. But there's something else, Monsieur Poirot. Something I wanted to tell you." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "When you were explaining Lady Hermione's crimes, you mentioned that she had been blackmailing others besides myself. You mentioned a vicar's illegitimate child, the Ashworth's daughter's elopement. Yes, those were inventions on her part. Fiction designed to make her crimes seem more widespread than they were. In truth, the only people she was actively blackmailing were Mr. Whitmore and myself. She had approached one or two others with veiled threats, but they had rebuffed her. Lady Hermione was not quite as successful in her schemes as she claimed." "Ah, so even in her confession, she exaggerated her power. How very human, yes. And there's something else. The French letters you mentioned, the ones in my desk that you examined." Poirot's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Yes, they weren't from Hermione. They were from my first love, a French girl I knew before I married. I kept them as a reminder of happier times. Hermione never knew about them. I'm not proud of keeping them, but they were precious to me in a way I can't quite explain." "Then how did Lady Hermione gain access to your safe?" "She didn't need to. She was clever enough to forge the handwriting on the threatening notes without reference material. But she made one mistake. She used her own notepaper, the expensive cream-coloured stock she ordered specially from London. I recognized it, though I said nothing at the time. I couldn't believe my own wife would do such things. And yet she did. The evidence was there, Sir Reginald, if only you had allowed yourself to see it. Yes, I was blind, willfully blind perhaps. I loved her, Monsieur Poirot. Despite everything, I loved her. And love, as they say, is blind." There was nothing Poirot could say to that. They took their leave shortly after, with Sir Reginald's thanks ringing hollowly in their ears. As their car drove away from Willowmere, Hastings looked back at the elegant Georgian house, its honey-coloured stone glowing in the morning sun. "It seems such a shame," he said. "Such a beautiful house, such tragedy." "Beauty and tragedy often dwell together, mon ami. It is the way of the world. But consider this, from tragedy may come redemption. Sir Reginald will tell the truth about Victor Novak. Peter Novak will receive justice for his uncle. Mr. Whitmore has been freed from his blackmailer's threats, and Dr. Thornley, though dead, has achieved the confession he sought. The truth has finally come out. And Lady Hermione will face the consequences of her actions. There is a certain justice in that as well. She sought to profit from others' secrets and paid the ultimate price. Her freedom, her reputation, her life as she knew it. Do you think she'll hang? That is for the courts to decide. But I suspect her age and sex will spare her that fate. She will likely spend the remainder of her days in prison. A different kind of death, perhaps, but a death nonetheless. The Lady Hermione who presided over Willowmere is gone forever." They lapsed into silence as the car wound through the Surrey lanes. After some time, Hastings spoke again. "You know, Poirot, there's something I don't quite understand. You said you knew Lady Hermione was the killer for some time. When exactly did you realize it?" Poirot smiled. That small, satisfied smile Hastings knew so well. "I suspected from the very beginning, mon ami, when Lady Hermione first told me about the mysterious occurrences. You see, her story had a fundamental flaw." "What flaw?" She claimed that objects were moved in her room, that papers were disturbed. But Hastings think, in a house like Willowmere, the lady's maid tends to her mistress's room daily. She tidies, she arranges, she cleans. Yet Lady Hermione never mentioned her maid noticing these disturbances. Why? Because the maid knew nothing unusual had occurred. The disturbances existed only in Lady Hermione's narrative. Then there was the miniature. She claimed it was stolen. Yet she did not report the theft to her husband. A valuable family heirloom gone. And she said nothing. Most irregular. And when the miniature reappeared with the photograph, she reacted not with relief at its return, but with fear at the photograph. That suggested to me that the miniature's disappearance had been orchestrated, that she had always known where it was. Finally, there was the matter of the note on her pillow. Who could place such a note there, in the lady's own bedroom, without being observed? Only someone with free access to that room. Only Lady Hermione herself. Or possibly her maid. But the maid had no motive and no knowledge of the secrets involved. But you had no proof. No, I had only suspicion and logic. So I watched and I waited. I observed who had access to what. Who knew what secrets. Who had what motives. And gradually the picture became clear. Lady Hermione was the spider at the centre of the web, spinning her threads of blackmail and deception. All I needed was to catch her in one of her own threads. The bank book. Precisely. I suggested to Inspector Marsh that Lady Hermione's rooms should be thoroughly searched. I knew that if she was indeed the blackmailer, she would have kept records. Perhaps not in the house originally, but once she retrieved them from the garden, she would have hidden them somewhere she felt was safe. And where does a woman feel safest? In her own private rooms, naturally. Brilliant, Poirot. Absolutely brilliant. Merely logical, mon ami. The little grey cells, they work in an orderly fashion. One observes, one deduces, one eliminates the impossible. And what remains, however improbable, must be the truth. It is the method of Hercule Poirot, and it has never failed. They reached the railway station just as the London train was pulling in. As they settled into their first-class compartment, Hastings stretched his legs with a sigh of relief. Well, I must say I'll be glad to be back in London. Willowmere was beautiful, but I've had quite enough of country house mysteries for a while. But naturally, the country, it is pleasant for a visit, but give me London. The order, the symmetry, the proper arrangement of streets and buildings, and my own apartment where everything is exactly where it should be. And no murders, one hopes, Poirot said dryly. Though with Hercule Poirot, one never knows when the next affair will present itself. The criminal mind, Hastings, it does not rest, and therefore neither can we. The train pulled out of the station, carrying them away from Willowmere and its tragedies. Through the window, Poirot caught a final glimpse of the house in the distance, its chimneys just visible above the trees. He thought of Sir Reginald, alone now in that beautiful house, carrying his burdens of guilt and loss. He thought of Dr. Thornley, whose conscience had finally driven him to seek the truth, only to be silenced forever. He thought of Victor Novak, dead 40 years, but not forgotten, his story finally told. And he thought of Lady Hermione, who had traded her soul for financial security and paid a price far higher than she could have imagined. Poirot? Hastings's voice interrupted his reverie. You've gone very quiet. What are you thinking about? I think, mon ami, about the nature of secrets. How they poison, how they corrupt, how they destroy. Sir Reginald and Dr. Thornley kept their secret for 40 years, and it ate at them like a cancer. Lady Hermione discovered their secret and used it for profit, and it destroyed her. Peter Novak learned the secret and sought justice, and it nearly cost him his freedom. So many lives twisted and ruined by one lie told long ago. Rather depressing when you put it like that. Perhaps. But there is also hope. The truth has finally emerged. The lie has been exposed. And from that exposure comes the possibility of healing, of redemption. Sir Reginald will spend his remaining years trying to make amends. Peter Novak will know that his uncle has been vindicated. The poison has been lanced, so to speak. The wound may heal now. And you, Poirot? How do you feel about it all? Poirot considered the question carefully. I feel, Hastings, that justice has been served. Not perfect justice, that is impossible in this imperfect world, but justice nonetheless. The guilty have been exposed. The innocent have been cleared. Order has been restored from chaos. For Hercule Poirot, that is satisfaction enough. I suppose it has to be. Indeed. And now, mon ami, I think I shall take a little nap. The intellectual exertion of the past few days has been considerable. When we reach London, we shall have a quiet dinner at my favourite restaurant, and then I shall return to my apartment and arrange my belongings in their proper places. The symmetry, Hastings, it soothes the soul. Hastings smiled affectionately at his friend. You and your symmetry. Very well, Poirot, you rest. I'll wake you when we reach London. But as Poirot closed his eyes, he found sleep elusive. His mind kept returning to Willowmere, to the drawing room where he had revealed Lady Hermione's crimes, to the shocked faces of the assembled guests. There was something deeply satisfying about that moment. The moment when all the pieces fell into place, when the puzzle was solved, when order was restored. It was why he did what he did, why he would continue to do it for as long as his little grey cells remained sharp. For Hercule Poirot was not merely a detective. He was a restorer of balance, a bringer of truth, a champion of justice in a world that too often preferred comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. And if that made him somewhat vain, somewhat peculiar, somewhat obsessed with order and symmetry, well, so be it. The world needed Hercule Poirot, and Hercule Poirot, in his own way, needed the world.